All right, so today we are officially going into our Algebra 2 content finally. Hallelujah. Say goodbye to geometry. And we're going to be starting with order of operations. So just to get started, I want you guys, you probably see like these things pop up, on Facebook and on the internet every once in a while where it's like only a genius can solve these, and it's just using order of operations. So I want you just to try to solve this right now, and just want to see if you're a genius or not, so you can kind of see where you're at before going into these notes. So go ahead and try to solve this. All right, so if you got negative 13, that's correct. That's the right answer. Congratulations, you're a genius. If you didn't get negative 13, that's okay. That's what these notes are for. If you got 2, that just means you went left to right, and you didn't do like the order of operations. You just kind of left to right, whatever came first you did. So that's not the way we do it. But it's okay. Again, we're going to learn. It's okay if you got it wrong. If you did... or if you did it and got negative 17, that's close. You did the order of operations somewhat, but when you got to the addition and subtraction, you did your addition first and then subtraction, when really addition and subtraction happen at the same time as you go left to right. Looks like I could spell subtraction right. I'll just do sub. So again, negative 17 is incorrect. That means you were close. You just did addition first and then subtraction, but you have to make sure that those two things happen at the same time. And if you got 0, that just means you kind of chunked it up. You did the subtraction first, and then you did the addition, and then you multiplied. Which, again, not correct. But we're going to learn how to do it correctly. So order of operations, in order to avoid this mistake where you do like strict, what PEM does, how it goes, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction, that's implying that multiplication has to come before division and addition has to come before subtraction, but that's not always the case. So in order to kind of avoid that problem, I'm going to use GEMS, which some of you may know, for order of operations. And so the G, or the P in PEMDAS, stands for grouping. The P stands for parentheses. Grouping just applies anything that is grouping things together. So it can be parentheses, it can be brackets, it can be stuff under a square root symbol, it can be stuff inside some absolute value bars. So that's absolute value, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But grouping just means anything that groups operations together. And the important thing about grouping is once you go inside that grouping, so once you go inside the parentheses or inside the brackets, your GEMS, your order of operation, starts over again. So once you go inside the parentheses, you got to start going back through the order. So GEMS starts over once you're in the grouping. Okay, so that's our first order of operations. Then next is our E, which is also E in PEMDAS, and that stands for exponents. So that's anything, if you have like 3 to the second power, that little baby 2 up there floating in the upper right hand corner is the exponent. We'll talk more about exponential form in a minute too. Then next in GEMS is the M, which is the M and D in PEMDAS. And again, with GEMS, I keep it just as one step because it stands for multiplication and division, but they happen at the same time. You just go left to right. Whatever one comes first, you do first. Multiplication and division at the same time, in all caps because it's important. At the same time. You go left to right. Okay, so hopefully with gems, having it just happen in one step will help you remember that it happens at the same time, and you go left to right. And the same thing for the S. The S stands for subtraction and addition, so that's the AS in PEMDAS. And again, addition and subtraction happen at the same time. Go left to right, whichever comes first. Again, all caps, at the same time. Okay, so we'll come back and practice some of these order of operations in a minute, but first I want to touch on a couple things that we brought up here when we were going through the gems. So first is absolute value. So absolute value looks like two vertical lines. That's the bell, pardon that. So it could be like, and then something's happening inside. It could be just a number, it could be some operations. But an absolute value, what absolute value does is it describes the distance, so no negatives because distance is never negative, a value is from 0. So it describes the distance, a value is from 0. So for example 1a, so grouping, right, with our gems, we start what's inside these absolute values. We can do that addition, -3 plus 7. You can type it in your calculator if you want. Type your -3 and then plus 7, hit enter, and that'll give you 4. So we want the absolute value of 4. And so this is really asking how far is 4 from 0. Well, 4 is 4 away from 0. So 4 is the absolute value of 4. If we look at letter B, so we got some more stuff going on, so we're going to do our gems. So we'll start with our grouping. Grouping is this stuff inside the absolute value first. Absolute value groups stuff together. Once we go inside the grouping, our order of operations starts over again. So we look at our gems again. Starting with G, there is another grouping. We have a set of parentheses inside the absolute value. And then there's just addition. So that's where we're going to start, inside the parentheses. So we do 2 plus 7 will give us 9. So we're going to copy everything else down. And now once there's one number inside parentheses or inside brackets, you can drop the parentheses if you want. So if you want to just write it as absolute value of 5 minus 9, that's fine. You can keep them too, but the parentheses no longer serve a purpose when you just have one number inside the parentheses. And so we're still in our grouping, so we're still inside the absolute value here. We have to do 5 minus 9, which gives us -4. And so this absolute value here we have to do next. We can get out of that absolute value. And again, this is asking how far from 0 is -4. And -4 is 4 away from 0. So this absolute value of -4 is equal to 4, positive 4. And so since we've taken the absolute value, those absolute value bars are going to go away. And what's happening in between the 2 and this absolute value here is multiplication. This will be 2 times 4 minus 2. Because if you have a number right in front of a grouping thing, so right in front of parentheses or right in front of brackets or square roots or absolute values with no operation symbol in between, that's always going to imply multiplication. And so now going back through our order of operations here, our gems. So grouping's done. We don't have any exponents, but now we have some multiplication or division. We have this multiplication here we can do. So 2 times 4 is 8 minus 2. And we're left with just that subtraction. 8 minus 2 is 6. Okay, so I want you guys to go ahead and try letter C. So remember order of operations. Gems start inside your absolute value. Remember multiplication and division happen at the same time as you go left to right. So you're going to end up doing this division first, then the multiplication. Then take the absolute value, then deal with that -3 out in front. So go ahead and try letter C. All right, moving on, talking about some exponents here. So exponential notation. Exponential, oh my gosh, come on. There we go, okay, exponential notation. It has two parts. We have an exponent and we have a base. So for example, if we had like 5 to the third power, whatever this big number is the base. The small number, and the superscript there is the exponent. If we had -5 raised to the third power, if it's inside parentheses, then this whole thing is the base. Everything inside the parentheses is the base. So -5 is the base, which is grouped together. That 3 is still the exponent. We could also have just a -5 cubed with no parentheses around the negative and the 5. If there's no parentheses grouping that together, then only the thing the exponent's attached to is the base. So in this case, only the 5 would be the base. So there's no grouping, so that negative would not be included. But that 3 is still the exponent. So to evaluate exponents, it's going to be repeated multiplication. Repeated multiplication of the base. The exponent is what tells you how many times to multiply the base by itself. Okay, so let's do some examples. So expand and evaluate. Expand means to write out the expanded or the repeated multiplication. And evaluate means to actually do the repeated multiplication. So for letter A, we have 6 squared. 6 is our base. 2 is our exponent. That means we'll take 6, multiply it by itself 2 times. So 6 times 6, that's the expansion, equals 36. 36 is when we evaluate. So we have both of these things. Okay, letter B is -6 in parentheses, so that whole thing, -6 is the base, 2 is our exponent. So when we expand it, when we do our multiplication, that whole -6 is the base, so it'll be -6 times -6, because that negative was grouped together with the 6, that whole thing is the base, and the base is what we multiply by itself. So -6 times -6 is a positive 36. Okay, letter C. So now we don't have parentheses. So this negative is not grouped with the 6. The negative is its own thing. It's just going to chill out in front. But we do have this 6 squared. So 6 is the base. 2 is the exponent. And so it's going to be this negative chilling out in front, minding its own business. And then we do our expansion, which is just 6 times 6. So we'll have -36. Okay, so it's really important that you notice the difference between these two, B and C. If there is parentheses around a negative and a number, then that negative will be repeated every time you do the multiplication. If there are no parentheses grouping a negative and that number together when we have an exponent, then that negative only happens once out in front, that's it. The repeated multiplication happens without it. Okay, so I want you guys to go ahead and try D and E. So you're going to do the same thing we just did, expand, write out that multiplication, and evaluate. Okay, example 3. Now we're going to do some order of operations practice. Again, we have gems, grouping, exponents, multiplication and division at the same time, subtraction and addition at the same time. So let's look at letter A. So G, start with our grouping. We have these parentheses, so we go inside the parentheses, Our gems starts over. So we don't have any grouping within the parentheses, but we do have an exponent. So we have to deal with that first. So I'm going to copy down everything else. And I'm going to do 4 squared, which is 4 times 4, which is 16. So I'll have 18 minus 16 plus 7 times 2. Now I still have the grouping to deal with, so I have to deal with this 18 minus 16 in parentheses. So I'll have 2 divided by 2 plus 7 times 2. And again, at this point, there's nothing left to group inside the parentheses here, so those parentheses are useless. If you want to get rid of them, cool. If you don't, awesome. Whatever works for you. But really, this is just saying 2 divided by 2 plus 7 times 2. So now, if we continue on with our gems, so we did our G, there's no more exponents to deal with, so now we're on M, which is multiplication and division happening at the same time as you go left to right. So start at the left, and as we go along, looking at our equation, oh, there's a division. We have to do that division first. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, plus 7 times 2. We still have some multiplication here. So left to right, multiplication happens. Do this multiplication. So I have 1 plus 14. Now we're just left with that addition. So 1 plus 14 gives us 15. Okay, and I would like you guys to go ahead and try letter B and C. Again, so be careful. The main thing, make sure you are following gems. Make sure you're doing this order of operation. Multiplication and division happen at the same time as you go left to right. Addition and subtraction happen at the same time as you go left to right. So go ahead, try B and C. All right, then there's just going to be a couple quick check questions and a self-assessment. Make sure you bring any questions you have to the Google Meet.